Hi, welcome to Infinite Leaders Live. I'm Lewis Keynes. Our why is simple: to be better educators and to be better humans. We want to support and encourage infinite learning for everybody, regardless of role or rank, to be willing to listen and learn and share. I'm joined by my pal, Alan Dunstan.
Thanks, Lewis. Really looking forward to diving deeper into understanding how leaders with an infinite mindset translate this across to their teams. We want to focus on the things you don't get taught at university or on any courses. We want real life lessons from real life people with real life experience.
And we're recording live, so there's always a few mistakes along the way. It's raw, it's rugged, but we're getting there and we're improving. We'd love your feedback, so please get in touch. We fully believe in what we're doing, and we're determined to be better as well. So please let us know if you have any thoughts or comments. You can find us on Instagram. IGTV has all our episodes, our YouTube channel. You can find Alan and I's opinion on Twitter and also at www.theinfinitelearners.com. So listen, learn and share with your colleagues and friends. Alan, let's get stuck in and introduce today's guest.
Yeah, today's guest is Ryan Campbell. He's the High School Vice Principal of Curriculum Learning at Jakarta Intercultural School. Before that, he was the Deputy Head at British School Manila, and we are delighted to have Ryan on the show. So get your pens and papers ready. No doubt there'll be some absolute gems of wisdom. And can we start, Ryan, by just telling us a little bit about your journey to where you are now, please?
There's always gems of wisdom, isn't there? There's always gems of wisdom.
Well, just a really broad bio. I've been in pretty much spent most of my adult life in Southeast Asia, apart from 3 years in China. I got to Asia in 2001. I think I was 24, 25 then. I spent most of my time in Indonesia, 2 years in Manila, and the 3 years in China I mentioned. And, I absolutely love the place. I love the region. I love the people and the culture and the history and everything about it. In terms of work now, I'm very lucky. Well, I was incredibly lucky with the job in Manila and the school there, and that was an incredibly, I would say, an incredibly strong foundation in terms of starting the more kind of senior posts. And really, I do reflect on that quite a lot. I look back on that a lot. And then from there, the job there to the job I'm now, in many ways very similar. Manila, there was probably a little bit, I would say probably more in terms of the whole school things to do with the PD and things, whereas the size of GIS, it's such a big school that the high school is very much, its own entity, and whether we'll be so big after the break, I'm not sure with the impact of COVID, but and it's been really an amazing experience to work in more of, although an international school as well, more of an American style high school. Although I'm sure the American teachers tell me it's very different from what an actual American high school is like as well. So it gives you kind of overview of how I've got where I am.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Just tell us then, what inspires you to get out of bed every day?
Okay, that's an absolutely great question, because I'm not sure if I could actually pick one single thing. If I had to sum it up, I would say certainly, and this is going to make me sound very one-dimensional. Certainly, work's always sort of in the back of my mind, and I'm always sort of thinking a little bit about it. So when I wake up in the morning, there's a kind of a focus kind of kicks in. Like I couldn't really tell you what my morning routine is. I couldn't tell you about brushing my teeth or eating my breakfast. I'm sure I must do these things, but I'm very much, the mind's already kind of moved towards the office. So in terms of what I look forward to in the morning, very much, it's hard to pin it more on one particular thing, so much as I very much have that feeling of that's where I'm meant to be right now. That's where I kind of belong, and not being there, I'd feel I was missing something. And I actually find the same in longer holidays. I start to feel that as well. I feel I'm missing something as well. So I would definitely say, oddly, and this is probably quite a West Coast Scottish thing to say, I kind of do identify myself a bit through my work. and I think teaching's unique like that as well. I think teaching's one of those jobs where you kind of go through and you can say, well, actually, I am proud I did that. Whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, it has a meaning that transcends just, going to work for the salary or whatever. And even though I've got friends I was at school with are much more highly paid, I'm not sure they could honestly say they have the same sense of meaning and purpose that education has. I'm not saying it always has, but I'm saying that there's definitely something in there that does give it that kind of the vocational nature to the job more than just it's a job.
Can you pinpoint what that meaning is for you, Ryan?
Personally, for me, it's the idea of, and this is probably my history teaching background here, is definitely that idea of connection backwards to the tradition. When I say tradition, I mean in the grandest sense. I mean, we all kind of make our own myths and we all kind of make our own way of finding purpose. I think education gives you so many streams that you can do that. For me personally, it's the idea that I'm part of this tradition of education from the Western and the Eastern traditions that goes back thousands of years, and that I'm doing something in that, albeit in my own very minor way. And you want to leave it slightly, at least have contributed something. I mean, there's so many examples of that, but one of the things that caught my eye a few years ago, and really, I'm always like, well, I'm a bit of a magpie, I read lots of things, and things that I find interesting, I grab it and think about it and chew on it. And I really liked reading one of my favorite philosophers, I suppose, he has a lot of critics, is Nassim Taleb. And it's, the idea of the Lindy, where ideas age backwards. Well, that's what I'm getting at here with in education, that tradition. There's something new is more likely to die, right? Whereas something old is more likely to last as long as it's been. Well, we come from a very old tradition indeed. If you go in the West, you're going all the way back to Socrates, or go earlier if you want. In the East, you're going to Confucius. There's something there. There's something grander and noble there that if you wanted to identify yourself with, you definitely could. And to give you that purpose about getting up in bed, getting out of bed and going to work. I was back to the magpie idea. I was reading. It must have been about 6 months ago, maybe a year, but a beautiful bit of research that kind of summed up the point here. It was Carton. It was about NASA, sense making and leadership, and it was this idea of the title of it. I forget the exact title, but it was I'm not mopping floors. I'm putting a man on the moon, or something. And it was basically about how Kennedy, during the moon landings, it was an organizational science piece of work about sense making and leadership. But when I read that title, I thought, I have to read this, because it's exactly what I'm what I'm talking about here. This idea where how you interpret the boring, humdrum parts of the job, and marking your books and giving the same feedback comments you've probably given hundreds of times before. It's about taking that, and now you've given it hundreds of times before, but for that individual student, it's completely new. It's something new for them. That lesson you've taught a lot before, it's new for them. And when I was reading that, I'll send it to you if you're interested, the Carton article. It'll probably appeal to both of you as well. But just that idea of taking the humdrum and the parts of the job that can get people down in any profession, but connecting it to something grander and more noble. And the example I gave you there was about the time. Sorry, going on again.
No, it's fine. We could listen to you all day. I'm just thinking in terms of if I'm listening to you right there, is there a suggestion that everybody's playing a small role to contribute towards something that's a greater good? Is this the kind of thing that you're looking at?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I took away from Manila I took many things away from Manila, as I mentioned. One of the things I'll never forget was I think it must have been my first assembly or whichever one it was at the end of the year, where the cleaners were called up onto the stage and got the huge cheer, and all the groups and the subcontractors were all brought up, and the gardeners and everything. And I suddenly thought, and they saw that there, exactly what I'm talking about, like the parts of the job, and I couldn't do what they do, but the connection to the grander mission there, and community as well. Sorry, go on again.
It's fantastic, Ryan, and I fully agree with you. And it's one of the things I'll miss heavily about BSM is that sense of community. I love the magpie. That's something I'm going to take with me. That's my gem already. I'm certainly a magpie. I'll take things from everywhere. I'm interested in now is what I'd like to know then is, what are your little guiding principles and core values that you've sort of got from your range of areas that you study and you read, and then what do you then do as a leader to promote those values?
Okay, that's a cracker. And I would say sometimes you promote values not by doing them yourself, but by creating the circumstances for them. So, for example, I'm not necessarily, the warmest person in the world, but I would always make sure that there was someone there that could play that role. So when I say, so that's the first principle I'll get across, I would say there, is not to try and be a kind of hero or brilliant at everything. I would even regard that as a positive thing. I would regard that as a weakness. Because if you're a senior leader, everyone tries to do that when they're younger, but if you're a senior leader trying to do that, you've absolutely missed the point. Because the point of you as a senior leader is to assemble the circumstances. You're the gardener. You're not one of the products. Your job is to make sure. And when I say gardener, I don't mean a monoculture. It's not a palm oil plantation. We're talking more of like the Tom Sherrington, the rainforest thing, where there's lots of different things going on. Well, a bit like that. But your job is to create the circumstances there. So I guess that's the first point: is not to try and be the hero, not to try and be good at things. But the flip side of that, and I'm not sure if this is, in fact, this is, I was going to say, is it the same point or is it a different one? Let's make it a different one. You have to be, at all times, you have to be aware that you're probably wrong, right? Not you personally, but now, this doesn't mean you can have doubt, and I'll get to that in a minute. Doubt's a luxury that you cannot afford sometimes. But you should always have the idea in your mind that you can be wrong. Now, you have to take it beyond being the idea. You have to put in actual checks to see if you're wrong. So, for example, a lot of people say, have someone there that can tell you if you're wrong. Well, but they might be wrong too. They might not know, or they might be, So I don't actually necessarily agree with that. That's the old, I think, it's Eisenhower idea that, was it Eisenhower or MacArthur? I forget, one of the famous American generals. There was, if we're all in agreement, if we're all thinking the same thing, someone's not thinking. Well, in practice, that doesn't work, because people do, I find in big meetings, they very much do tend to defer to the senior opinion, even if they're doing it subconsciously. So that's not going to work for you as an up-and-coming senior leader. And anyone that tells you the opposite, well, they're probably kidding themselves. So you want to put in place, when you're planning things, you want to put in place some more objective measures. And you also want to have a very healthy respect for critics. Now, don't listen to them or let them get you down or anything, but listen to them in the sense of, if you've got those critics, they're going to find the weak spots in your thinking, your argument, faster than anything, faster than any consultant you could pay for. I mean, that's why I quite like Twitter for that, because it's such a savage, it's such a savagely aggressive environment. It's particularly educational sometimes. or maybe that's just how I behave on it. But any flaws in your thinking get pressure tested very, very quickly. And I find that very useful. So I guess that would be my next one. Make sure you're putting in place kind of objective checks to say, you know, like, I always assume that you could be wrong. I think that's incredibly healthy. But like I said, what's not healthy is that element of doubt. And that leads me on to, how many am I allowed? How many do you want? 3 or 4? I've probably used up the 3 of them.
As many as you want, mate. I'm sure you could glod all day.
Another one I would say is vital, I find, which I actually got from, it's one of the boys schoolboy Latin class, but there was a battle, I forget what it was, the Romans and I think it was the Etruscans or Samnites. Just say it was the Samnites for now. I assume I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. Romans against someone.
Somebody will tell you you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So it was this idea of the Caudine Forks. The Caudine Forks was the name of the battle, but it always stuck in my mind because of this. It wasn't the Romans were defeated, but whoever it was they were against had their option of making them friends or destroying them utterly. And what they did was they made them pass under the yoke of submission. But in the end, so they humiliated them. But in the end, they came back and wiped out whoever it was who made a mistake. So the 2 options were, make friends with them or wipe them out. But they didn't do either. They humiliated them, but I left them intact. Now, what did I? So that actually, that's kind of these things that stuck in my mind is the idea. And what I took from that was the middle ground is not a safe place to be. And when I was certainly in senior leadership these days, I find stay away, absolutely stay away from the middle ground when you're making those decisions. By all means, have checks and balances in that you're wrong. And this is where I mean about doubt can be deadly. But watch out for the middle ground. Watch out for caution sometimes. It's not what it's cracked up to be. And here's why. I suppose you're being cautious in the macro scale by putting in the checks to see if you're wrong. But basically you want to make sure you do commit to something. Now, by all means, if you've got those checks in, you can change your mind. But if you constantly wait before deciding, you're never going to learn anything, right? Because now there are times where the situation is so unclear, okay, it would be foolish to commit. So there's always but generally if you don't start things, you end up chasing your tail, and in the end, you're going to have to start anyway. So I think that's a really important point that I've kind of picked up over the time. And what do I mean? Another thing, I'll give you one more then. Another thing I do quite a lot is I do tend to, and this does seem to be a bit different from other people. You've had Simon Mann. I've not listened to Simon Mann yet, but Simon Mann and I completely disagree on this point. He loves the idea, all teachers are, I don't know if maybe he's changed his mind, but he used to, teachers are all passion players and they all take it personally. Well, that's fine, right? Good for them. But if you're a senior leader, you cannot do that, right? Nothing is personal. But if you're making anything personal, by definition, you're not being professional, right? So you cannot take things personally. And you also, similar to that is when you, by not taking things personally, it allows you to be open to being wrong. So I would say not taking things, having a grander idea of what professionalism is and what allows you to reframe things like that, not as weakness in asking a head of department for advice. Well, why should you ask them for advice? They're the specialists. Like I'll give you an example. We're putting together, there's some new things have come in from the PE, particularly with regards to PE, from Jakarta for opening up with the COVID regulations. Of course, I'm going to work very closely with the department on that. I'm not going to impose something because I know they're the specialists. I'm confident enough. Everything is that back to that point. It's not personal. I don't have to be a lone hero because I wouldn't regard that as professional. So very different from Simon Mann unless he's changed. But
so some really good points there, Ryan. You know, you talked about trying not to be a specialist in everything, and if you are, then you're probably doing something wrong. And then the 3 core values you talked about there, I found really interesting that you're probably wrong. So set up some way of objective measures or being challenged along the way. Don't go for middle ground. Just start it. Make a start or don't make a start. Don't hesitate in between. And in senior leadership, nothing is personal. I think there are 3 really cool takeaways there. What really intrigues me is when you're line managing and you're leading teaching and learning, you're line managing heads of curriculum and other roles in school. What does that look like? How do you form those and create that environment?
Yeah. So you want to get into the toolbox. Well, okay. So in terms of the toolbox, one of the things I'd actually done it. I was familiar with the kind of solution-focused approach, but it was in Manila and with John Hendon, where I was familiar from it just in an academic sense because I'd had to do as part of a master's course, I'd had to do a thing on career counselling and coaching, which of course perfect fit for senior leadership. But do you remember the first John Hendon course? I don't know what that is, 5 years ago now, more than that, something, 6 years ago, I can't remember. Anyway, what John did, which I really liked, was, now obviously I saw it differently from him. He was using it particularly in his context about working, suicide prevention and that sort of thing. But when I was hearing him talk, I was suddenly thought, this would fit perfectly for running workplace meetings, for conversations with the parents. It would need adjusted, of course, but the toolkit and the actual toolkit. So that's what got me kind of started. And I promise I'll answer the question. I just wanted to give a little bit of context because we were all there. So that got me started those years ago in developing the specific toolkit, which so very much comes from the solution-focused approach. But then I realized, I think probably towards the end of Manila, or definitely when I started at GIS, that solution-focused toolkit is fantastic when it's you and one person. It's fantastic when you're in a small group. Now at the organizational level, remember GIS is very, very big, you needed something else. And that was where I moved. I wanted something in the same vein, the same philosophical vein. And that was where the appreciative inquiry idea came in, which is again very solution focused. And that kind of gave me broadly my set of tools there. So I had for my small group and my individual work, something that, it doesn't look like solution focused. Now, we actually had John Hendon over at GIS, I think my first year here, and that was really interesting to talk to him about some of the changes I'd made to it. And it's kept changing because it's something I reflect on and use a lot. And then the appreciative inquiry was something just we're using, and then that's definitely added a lot to what I do. So appreciative inquiry, the systematic, and you're going to say, right, get to the tools. What would that look like? Okay, so first thing I would do is I always look to get to solutions. So that doesn't mean to say that you want to dismiss the problem out of hand. So I'm probably a bit more detail focused than most. Now the detail focused part, one of the things, the 5 o'clock rule, I don't know if you remember that, but the 5 o'clock rule is something I've never really forgotten. For me, that's one of the most important, it's one of the minor, but most important to me, solution focused ideas where you make sure the session, under half of it is on the problem. Now I use that to say that you should always give, a relatively good chunk to explore the initial problem. But then right at the start, so when I start meetings and things, I'll outline norms. When I use meeting norms, when I establish norms for things, if we're looking at an issue or a problem, I would say we're only going to look at this for this, because then I want to move to solutions. And that idea that solutions are not connected to the problem has been really, really important for me. Appreciative inquiry works similar, but it's more of an organizational level. Here's the problem. How can we work through together to explore that? Then I took another thing. I was reading one of the Heath brothers books, and this is back to magpie idea again. I thought, oh, that's going to fit perfectly into my game. It was the idea of looking for the bright spots. And it's virtually in the solution focused approach as it is, but it is this idea of who's making it work right now? Or if it's not working, who's making it less bad, and what are they doing? And then that getting right into the details. So I found that's very good as well. So how it would look like with me, first of all, I would possibly, if there was an immediate issue, spend some time talking about whatever it was. Then I would spend some time trying to find out, is there anyone not having this problem? Now, this was a problem. And then I would go, one of the other things I took from Solution Focus that I've done so often now, it's become virtually automatic, is the scaling questions. I think they're absolutely fantastic. And again, when I was talking about carton earlier and Nadia the man, that's a brilliant way of, once you've established what the fire mode is, right? Once you've established, and I know people hate to talk about vision, so let's not call it vision. Let's just talk about it, what success would look like in this in 6 months or something. And then call that a 10 and then work back from what number we're at. And then if they say 1, how do we go on from there? Why do I like that so much? Well, it means that by the end of that first 2 or 3 sessions, I have my kind of, as a group, we have our long-term goals, but more importantly, we have our immediate term, what we're going to go on. So I would say it looks like that. Now, and then of course, all those circuit breakers I talked about would go in on the process. Some of those would be informal. Some of those might be more formal as well. I'm always conscious of time. I'm someone who's made an awful lot of mistakes. So that's a big advantage. So I can think of where I've made things go wrong before and what mistakes I've made. So they're also very good circuit breakers. Go on, I'm interrupted.
No, you just talked about that. I want to know what your biggest mistake is, Ryan, and what you learned from it.
There's been so many that to pick. What would be the biggest? I would possibly the biggest in the generic, in the group of mistakes would be years and years ago. I used to take things very personally, and perhaps now that's why I'm completely the opposite. So perhaps that one. But I would say, and maybe the thing about the lone hero would be another group of mistakes I made when I was younger, whereas now I wouldn't even bother trying to be expect to know things. Having said that, I will always try and find out, just if nothing else, to show respect to the individual subject disciplines or areas or whatever it is, if it's pastoral. An individual biggest mistake, right? Let's try and think. I'm trying to think of a funny one. I might need some time to think of a good one, but I mean, like I said, there's been so many. I would say some of the ones that I've it's easier to say some of the ones that are most regretted. The ones that I've most regretted are where I've caused upset to people without meaning to. I'm slightly, as well, you both know me pretty well, so I can come across as a bit cold-blooded sometimes, and I'm not that emotional, which is usually very good normally. I'm usefully cold-blooded, as I've been described as by someone before, but I sometimes, as a direct result of that, I have missed connections with people that maybe they were looking for a bit of support, or maybe they wanted some time to talk about something and I didn't pick up on it, and I've later realized that actually I should have picked up on that, and I've made a little problem bigger. Another big mistake I've made is I sometimes, and I still do, get accused of being a bit too interventionist. I'll go quick. Well, that probably is related to some very big mistakes I've made in the past, where I have let little problems get very big when I should have dealt with it. I should have been completely clear right at the start, and I thought it would just sort itself out. Another big mistake. I've made a lot of mistakes, right? Another big mistake I've definitely made over the years is not being clear on things like norms at the start and how we do things here. I didn't take culture very seriously, I think, initially. I think I probably came out of Manila much more sensitive to that, much more aware of that. And it was things like, you know, the assemblies and things, I think, that probably made me much better at that. I don't know, that's a lot of mistakes, but there's been a lot of mistakes. I still make mistakes all the time. I mean, the worst mistake to make is not to do anything. I mean, that's my whole point about the caudine forks again. If you don't do anything, if you don't commit, you're never gonna move forward. And you know what? It might not work out, and that's okay. And if you are in a situation where it doesn't work out, then you're probably not in a healthy environment for growing. You have to be in a situation where, you know, the kind of mistakes are encouraged and there isn't a kind of blame game culture. And that's why moving to solutions and appreciative inquiry do connect so well. And I really like that aspect about GIS as well.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about the culture and the norms that you work with at the moment, Ryan, and that you have on a day-to-day basis.
Well, my number one, the number one, which I'm sure we must have had this in Manila, but I don't associate it with Manila, is assume positive intent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We've heard that one before.
I find that is absolutely brilliant. This idea of, particularly with emails, I mean, apply it to anything, but emails are notoriously deadly, right, for senior leaders, because when you send them, people, you don't mean anything by it, but there's no tone of voice, and people, what did you mean by that? Or what did she mean by that? Also, when people send them to each other, they can react to that. Or when you get one from someone else, you can react. Oh, he's, you know, blah, blah, blah. Adding those magic words, assuming positive intent in, takes all of that off the table. It means that reacting to it is actually a luxury. Now, there are some people who are deliberately rude in print, but that's okay because you've established, you know, you'll have your norms for that as well, like your communication policy or whatever. And then if you have to speak to the person, you've got, you know, you could say, look, that's not how we do it here. We do look for a bit of warmth.
Is that something that's embedded, Ryan? So when you talked about, you know, do you go as far as actually writing on there, assume positive intent on your emails, or is that just understood?
I don't write it on emails, and it's definitely understood. I mean, it's definitely part of the culture, but I would say, yeah, I mean, we do at the start of every year with new staff. That would be one of the things we would get across. It even comes up in our interviews as well. So I would say that would be one that I've really taken from the GIS culture. And apologies if that was one of ours at BSM as well. It could well have been. It fitted BSM perfectly. The second one is moving to solutions, which was definitely part of what we did at BSM as well. I think the only difference between, I mean, in many ways, BSM was perfect preparation for GIS because they're very similar in that philosophy, but the scale of GIS is different because it's just so big. So adding the appreciative inquiry aspect of let's explore this together at an organizational level has been excellent. I would say that's another thing. What else about the GIS culture? I would say when you walk in fact, let me give a better, I was going to give you an example of walking in every day, but here's a better example. We just had to do a drive-through graduation, right? Now, graduation, like a lot of American schools, is a huge thing here. And this was very much, it was like the psychic fabric of the school had been torn asunder by not having this this closing graduation ceremony. And there was many noble attempts to to kind of fill the void caused by COVID there. There was a wonderful, the high school principal did this wonderful drive. The kids would come in and do a photo with him, and they'd pick up their goodie bag. It wasn't called a goodie bag, it was called something American, but whatever, a goodie bag of stuff and the yearbook. But there was definitely that wound there caused by the graduation. And just at the very end, the head of school and the deputy head and with the absolutely wonderful local staff, just got together with their team of people there on the ground, and a lot of these people involved, and all the leadership from the divisions that were there, and they put together this drive-through assembly, which was drive-through graduation. And I was away down at one of the stations as they came in, and we all kind of had to get up for the very last one. We all went running up. There was just as the last student crossed the graduation stage, all the local staff, everyone was there cheering. It was the most incredible thing. And then someone told me afterwards, the gardeners and the cleaners and everything, they'd been doing that for virtually every single one. And I thought, well, it was a whole day of it. I mean, that's just incredible. And it was that level of, I think that's the next thing I've taken away. And this was a BSM, but not taking anyone for granted who works in the organization. And I don't mean not taking them for granted in terms of, although I do mean this as well, like in terms of basic manners and being polite, but I also mean just taking the time to stop and talk to them and taking the time to ask and not just talk yourself, but actually to listen and ask. And you find out some really interesting things as well.
You made a really interesting point earlier. You know, if you go back to something you mentioned earlier, you said that, you know, you struggled at times with stopping and pausing and making those connections. How do you help yourself to do that now? How have you improved in that?
I make it again, probably back to the cold-blooded element. I make it I make it a goal. I say, right, okay, you're not good at this, Ryan. This is what you're going to need to do this. So I then start to really try and so when I come in the morning, and it's always about getting, well, as is everything, getting the first one in the morning sets the kind of mental pattern for the day. So as I come in, if the first security guard or the first people I meet, take the time there, and then that kind of sit, no matter what if you're running late, and I'm always running late. I'm always late for something. That seems to be a really good. And also, I'm very, very, very lucky with the office staff I have, because they keep me human. They come and talk to me and make sure my Indonesian doesn't completely atrophy.
Can I just take it back a step as well? And it's something that I'm quite interested in is when you're in that leadership role, you talk about not taking things personally. What strategies then do you put in place if you've made an unpopular decision and someone's getting at you and you're going home and you're taking it out on your wife and your kids, you're having face on? What strategy do you have then to make sure that you are not taking it personally?
I've got a lot. One of the things, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. So basically, when I get sent, I'll tell you a story, right? So there was a new person came in and they said, we're going to make the feedback survey of the day for the staff. We're going to make it non-anonymous. And they firmly believed that was good. And they had very noble reasons for this, that we're a professional organization, people should make their personal opinion. And I was immediately crestfallen because, probably why I like Twitter, I want that full unvarnished. And just to prove, I'm looking for the real critique. So that's the first thing I would say is the reframe. Take everything you get. So reframe any criticism as, something positive. And remember, I talked about the check and balances. Yeah. There's an immediate way to reframe right there is it doesn't mean to say they're right, but you need to make sure that you're approachable enough that they will criticize you. So the first thing you reframe is it's a compliment. They're coming to you to get stuck in. Not so. Therefore, there's less psychic weight on you to take home because you've seen it. You've reframed as a compliment. Mm-hmm. The second thing that decreases the kind of psychic weight of the criticism is not only is a compliment they've come to give you both barrels, but that actually this is one of your feedback loops because your Donald Rumsfeld got mocked for his unknown unknowns, but actually he had a real point, and it was back to the kind of Nazim Taleb there. You don't know what you don't know, and having those different perspectives coming in, and so there's another reframe that will lift the psychic weight off you. In fact, I would just add to that a bit and say that sometimes that criticism will save your bacon, right? Because you have made a mistake that's possibly because you're not meant to, or you're in a bubble, or whatever that you didn't mean, or an unintended consequence that you didn't mean to happen. And someone comes in and is comfortable coming in and closing the office door and telling you what's what, you will hang on. So there's another way. So to sum up, the reframe of it is very, very important in minimizing the carrying the damage later back home. And then the other thing is to develop, and this is another probably weird, develop your own rituals around it to show how important it is to you. So here's one of mine. I'm not saying copy this, but one of mine, there's a pin board beside my desk. I wish I was in the office actually, and I would turn the computer and show you, and you could see. And this is where I've made, where people have like that feedback survey I talked about before. There was someone who put on there once, and I thank them very much for this. So this is not a criticism. They put Ryan is a horrible presenter, and I thought, and
wow.
I looked at it, and I said, "Oh, that's fantastic." So I blew it up, I printed it, and it's on my wall. Right? Wow. It's literally, it's on this wall. I mean, you can call it my wall of shame, call it what you want. But the point is, it's a kind of negative trophy wall. But and it genuinely wasn't there to mock the person at all. It was there to mock me by myself, I suppose, if anyone. But actually, it was just to give me another goal. And there's lots on there. There's people send me cartoons of. There's another one that was on there. I think about my penchant for being late for meetings. Was some cartoon where, how about never is never a good time for you? And I thought, right, there's another reminder right there. But I'll need to try and be a bit more timely. So lots of things like that. So the trophy, it's a negative trophy. We probably need a word for it. But the negative trophy wall. Remind me to take a picture of it for you.
It's so powerful, Ryan. I'm just thinking about my wall's not big enough.
It's really
Great Wall of China.
It's really cool, Ryan, how you've really turned that into something that you talked earlier about making so many mistakes where you took something personally, and now you're using that in that kind of context where that's just fuel for you now, and that's fine. And it's not fuel that causes anger or drives you through passion or because of frustration, but it seems to be really because that's something that you've taken on board, you've depersonalized it, and it's something that you can work on, and that's fair enough.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. It's about redefining what professionalism means to you, and for me, it's just like there's another way. Like I'll do it. A live reframe is that even taking that stuff home would be, by definition, unprofessional because you've taken it home, right? So so then immediately, okay, right, how am I going to do? What am I going to do? Am I going to walk up the stairs 2 times before I go? Am I, what do I need to do and I think that's something, that idea of symbols and rituals to define ourselves. I mean, I suppose that's all the way back to my very first point I was talking about. You kind of have to make your own. You have to make your own foundation myth about your own job and your own profession, and then to make that foundation myth work for you, you have to build in your own symbols and rituals. And trust me, the better you get at that with yourself, the better you get at doing that at an organizational level, at the small group, or because those things are crucial. I mean, that's actually the idea of symbols. Just is big on symbols, batiks and dragons, but it's tying those symbols to real things about yourself. And again, this comes back to something I read years ago, which actually is sitting at my desk, so maybe I'd plan to read it again. Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey idea. You definitely want to add that bit of I don't know, is it existential or metaphysical gravitas to your job? It helps you get out of, like you said at the start, gets you out of bed in the morning. It gives you that purpose.
Right. I think we need to be winding it down, Ryan. There's some brilliant stuff coming through. I'm looking forward to this question, actually, as a history man yourself. Which three leaders in history would you love to go out for a meal with?
Oh, right. Mine would probably, well, Genghis Khan, of course.
Hey.
I imagine everybody would say him. Then, yeah, Genghis Khan for sure. Winston Churchill, because supposedly, brilliant at the after dinner. I've got to choose them it's for going out for an evening, right? It's
yeah, you're going out for a bit of a drink, bit of a meal. They'd be brilliant to see the conversation.
So Genghis Khan obviously knew his way around a night out, so he's a must. Winston Churchill for sure, and I think it's a bit gender imbalanced right now. So who would be a?
With some diversity.
I suppose someone. For my third one, can I have a completely random? It's like non-chosen. Someone completely random, because I think this is really important. So I would say I've got someone from Asia, I've got someone from Europe. So I would say someone from who would it be? Someone from North America or something, but someone completely different. And the reason for that is the idea of, and this is back to Twitter and back to reading, I suppose, as well, is you have to keep your eye always open for serendipity. And you can't be the magpie if you always read the same things or you always talk to the same people. So I would give, for my third choice, I would give it to someone else to choose for me, right?
Oh,
so that's my third choice, because I'm keeping that random. Otherwise, I'll just choose the same thought patterns that I would do ever. So, like I'm always maxing out my Twitter. I'm only allowed to follow whatever it is, 5,000 people or something. But I always try and every so often I'll delete a few people when I hit the max and just pick like really completely randomly just to see. And I think trying to keep that, especially as you get older, you become more fixed. I think that's really important. You have to keep room for some weirdness to hit you, and establish what. By weirdness, I mean weirdness to you, not weirdness to them. Weirdness to how you do things. Otherwise, you become very fossilized, or I do anyway. I become very fossilized very quickly.
Tell us then, Ryan, what's the book that you're reading at the moment? Is that one out of left field that challenges your views, or is that one that's very much in line with your own?
You would be, well, there is no book. There are books. So we'll just get Kindle. I'll read out the ones that are currently on the go. All right. I'm gradually ticking them off. There's The Enigma of Reason, which is about, it's basically an evolutionary psychological argument of why we've evolved to argue with each other, which obviously suits me. Andrew Roberts.
I don't agree with that.
Andrew Roberts' biography of Churchill, the Chubb Sherrington, the walkthroughs. Sorry, that's really good actually. £3 that was, but I've really enjoyed them. They're actually, I'm getting a lot out of them, even though I think they're maybe aimed more at beginner teachers. So I would disagree. I think that's great. Then the next one is What is Global History? And I've been finally, a book I've been told to read over the holidays called Embracing Complexity. That's every holidays, the senior leaders that just get told, they're given a shared book to read for their professional reading. And this is about embracing complexity and complex systems. And then a book which one of you two might have recommended, but was recommended by Tony Dickinson, one of the counsellors at our place, was about the All Blacks legacy, about culture setting, which is absolutely brilliant so far. And the last one on the immediate reading list, which I'm slowly getting through chapter by chapter, is a book called The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas, which is a huge big book. And I've tried to finish it about 5 times before and I've never managed it. So now I'm doing it chapter a day, and I'm trying to make finish it.
So what are you reading next week? Ryan, some as Alan would put it, absolute gems of wisdom there. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thanks.
I don't know about that, but hopefully it wasn't too boring.
Not at all. It was really nice to get a slightly different perspective on things. Certainly some ideas we haven't heard before, and loads to take away. So thanks very much for coming on. We're approaching the end, guys. So as ever, please search Infinite Leaders Live on YouTube and IGTV and check out our content on there. We're also pleased to announce that we'll be very soon launching on all popular podcast apps, iTunes and Spotify included. So keep your eyes peeled and please share far and wide with anybody that you think will find this useful. And finally, please remember to visit www.theinfinitelearners.com for any articles, webinars we've been doing, obviously this show, and also our weekly journal notes. Thank you very much, Ryan. Really appreciate that. And we'll see everybody next time.
Cheers.